Welcome to Partner Path, a podcast that unpacks the venture capital and growth equity ecosystem from a junior perspective. Young entrepreneurs and investors have already had a massive impact on the industry, having started unicorns and launched billion-dollar funds. We discuss these success stories and more by sharing perspectives and advice from some of the industry's most prominent role models. This podcast expresses our views as of the date published and does not represent the views of and is not endorsed by any company for which we work.
Today, we'd like to welcome Nevin Raj, the co-founder and chief operating officer of Grata, based in New York City. Welcome, Nevin.
Hey, Laura. Thanks for having me on today.
So I think to start, it would be great to kind of ground us on Grata and share the founding story and how you met your co-founder. And if you could, touch on the pain point Grata is solving and what motivated you to start Grata after leaving private equity.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little background on me. Before Grata, I originally graduated from Harvard in 2013 and worked in consulting at McKinsey and private equity at a firm called Riverside Partners thereafter. And the founding story of Grata came through my experience in private equity. And I actually linked up with one of my college classmates and friends. His name is Andrew Biskoski, also graduated in 2013 from Harvard. And we were complaining about some of the problems we see in our day-to-day. And the main problem I had was on private company information and collecting tons of data on privately held, middle market, pretty obscure companies to try to make an investment decision. And as I was describing this process to Andrew, I said, well, I end up going online, end up reading a website, end up going on LinkedIn. There's so much information on the web, in the public domain. It's just not all in one spot. It's not easy to synthesize. It's not there for investors. And Andrew, he's an engineer. He had his engineering cap on and he said, well, there's so much happening in machine learning, AI, web crawling technology. I'm pretty sure there's a way we can automate this and get this for you more effectively. And so we'd seen this opportunity where on one side, with the growth of the internet and businesses going online, there was so much information out there. But on the flip side, investors weren't able to use this as effectively. And with bridging that gap to technology, we went out with a thesis that we can make investing and deal making better if we can bring better information to the user. But throughout that journey, we actually bootstrapped a data business called Grata Data for 4 years before we started Grata. And our product that we were building, our solution, was really around a large-scale technology that could extract information and insights from online data, targeted more towards due diligence. And the way we found the problem that we solve today with Grata was through our clients, talking to them every day, understanding their needs, seeing why they came back to us. And one place that was the recurring, really predominant need in the investment world was around finding better deals. Everyone wants to do good deals. Everyone wants the highest quality deal flow. But either deals that come to you, you're screening them and you're figuring out which ones to pursue if they're coming from bankers, or you're out there finding the best deals. And we said, well, we can actually solve this problem if we make our technology accessible via a SaaS platform, a web-based SaaS platform that you can access every day and run searches on and really find every company in a space, not just for a due diligence, not just to map a competitive landscape, but to actually map out the market of companies you could acquire. So we evolved from starting off with really focusing on this information problem to building a SaaS platform that's powered by a search engine technology. And we've grown from there to include different components of the workflow and other parts of the end-to-end sourcing process. But it really started from that initial insight.
So as you were growing and building your thesis and building this data set out, how did you think about attaining product market fit? Maybe talk us through the process of implementing product changes and how you confirmed that you had achieved product market fit.
Yeah, product market fit can come in a couple of ways. You can observe it qualitatively, and you can also see it quantitatively. The qualitative part comes down to how easy it is to pitch, and what people say when you have conversations with them. And you can't expect everyone to buy. It's never true for any company. There'll always be a reason why someone can't buy. It could be budget, it could be timing. But what we tried to check was, how often do people have this need that we're talking to? So when you size the market, you look at how many investors are out there, how many deal makers are out there, and there has to be enough of them that have this problem, willing to pay enough to have a TAM that's even big enough. So we did that work and we said, hey, there are over 20,000 investment professionals out there. It's not just private equity, but growth equity and VC and hedge funds investing in private markets. And so a certain portion of them need to be willing to pay the ACV that we need to make this TAM. And so as we did our interviews and our client calls and our customer calls, we saw what percent of the market our value proposition resonated with. And we saw that it was a really high percentage saying, yes, I need to find better deals. I can't find good deals. I want to do proprietary outbound deal sourcing. And then I need a good solution to make this happen. And so we went down the funnel, looked at the math, and said, this pitch, this value proposition is really resonating with the market. Once we saw that in the initial data, then it became, when we showed them the product, how quick was the uptake? Was it, yeah, I see this solves my problem, great, or I need to have these other features in order to buy this product? And we've evolved the product a lot. And in the early days, there were certain things that we had or certain things that we didn't have where people wouldn't buy, but they said, come back to me in 6 months or a year, and if you have this, I will. And so there are different clients now who have now been on Grata for 1 or 2 years who I talked to 3-4 years ago who said no, but then said yes to us when we had what we wanted. So I think product market fit is about understanding the problems and what you need to solve them. And sometimes you can't have everything, but understanding your path to getting those minimum viable features to solve the problem. So part of it was that math that we ran, but part of it was just the feeling of more people are saying yes, and this is starting to pick up in the market.
Yeah, and it's such a phenomenal product, and would love to take a step back from Grata specifically. I think you have great perspective on the private investing landscape, given your customer base and specifically sourcing and sourcing mechanisms. So with that in mind, would love to hear what various sourcing strategies do you see in the market and how have they changed over the last 5 years?
That's where all the change is happening right now. If we were to turn back the clock on private equity, even when I was coming out of college 10 years ago, this concept of business development and deal sourcing was very nascent. Only a few firms really did it the way they do it now. And all firms are talking about portfolio operations and operating partners. Really is like probably 5 to 7 years ago where business development started to come up in a private equity firm as a core function. And not just private equity, but growth equity, VC, any deal-making organization, any deal maker. And what we saw originally was business development was the function you use to describe how you manage your bankers, how you manage your inbound sources of deal flow. It became managing bankers, managing lenders, managing advisors, in some cases even managing LPs on an investor relations side. That was the reactive private equity firm. That was the deal maker who is getting deals to them and they're evaluating that. The way that shifted over the last 5 years, particularly in the last 3, is more of the proactive deal maker. Someone who says, I'm not going to review a bunch of deals and just pick the best ones. I know what I want. I know what works for me. I've seen thousands of deals. I'm going to go out and find them. And they may be ready to transact. They may not be. Or they may go through a banked auction or limited auction process. It doesn't matter. I'm going to build that relationship. And therefore, I'm going to have an advantage in this deal when they're ready to transact. So we've seen the shift to more proactive deal sourcing, whether that's reaching out directly to companies, networking via conferences and events, working with bankers, asking lawyers and accountants and consultants and service providers to help connect to their clients. And it's been this omni-channel, really full-fledged effort at finding ways to get good deals. The best analogy I can use is deal making is turning into and looking a lot like sales and marketing on the corporate side. When you look at Grata, the way we get customers, we don't expect someone to refer us customers all day. We do marketing. We have ads. We have a website. We go to conferences. We have a sales team. We have BDRs. We have account executives. We do like 8 or 10 different things to get deals for Grata. Deal making, private equity, growth equity is starting to look the same. It's almost a one-to-one analogy. And granted, it's a different product. It's a different service. You're offering capital and advice, and there are nuances and changes in the way that it's done. But conceptually, it's pretty similar.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And you see it in the various software products that are now sourcing facing, right? That people are leveraging. I think CRMs have become increasingly important for sourcing and just a kind of a general core software item for various private investment firms.
Exactly. And that's why you have the rise of like Deal Cloud and Affinity that are purpose-built CRMs for deal makers, because the sales and marketing tools don't work. You really need a purpose-built tool. You can't use Zoom Info to source deals. You need a real deal sourcing platform. You can't use Salesforce or HubSpot to necessarily power the most efficient deal-making engine. You really have to customize it and make sure it works for your use case, which is why you either buy purpose-built or you customize something.
Thinking across the various areas that you can source venture capital, growth equity, and middle market PE, do you see kind of cold email outreach across all three strategies? I know that's kind of a strategy that has historically been fairly fruitful within tech sales and in general sales. But do you see it kind of moving into the private investment landscape?
Yeah, 100%. It's probably the predominant strategy right now to get good deals. And it's because not everyone's doing it, and the ones who do it aren't doing it effectively. And you've seen it actually, it started off in growth equity. The reason it started off in growth equity is that growth equity works with a lot of, it's usually first capital in, which means the company it's bootstrapped, it doesn't have outside institutional investors, which means they're not in TechCrunch. They're not on Crunchbase, they're not in the news, no one's talking about them. And that means they live outside of this kind of tighter knit Silicon Valley network. And most investors don't have connections to them. So they tend to write cold emails and find ways to get in touch that are a little more creative than asking for an intro from a friend or from a classmate. And then what happened is growth equity sits right in between venture and private equity on the investing spectrum. What happened is that venture started to pick up on this. And while venture does a lot of intros and warm intros, they realize that to get in front of some of the best companies, you can't just wait for them to come to you. Maybe if you have one of the best brands out there, you'll get more founders coming to you. But even so, maybe you're a top brand and someone else found you first. So a founder's coming to you with a term sheet, and now you're trying to bid up on a deal. Venture realized this and they started going outbound. And then private equity does this primarily, we've seen with add-on acquisitions, tend to be smaller, kind of higher volume deals where they need to be more proactive and more outbound because the deals are too small to be banked. And what we've seen is even some of the largest firms like the Blackstones and the KKRs of the world on deals that they know are going to be banked, they're starting to go outbound to start building relationships with management teams because they want to come into an auction. They want to know that they're going to be first in line or second in line because they've talked to the CEO for the last 3 years, and they can bring certainty to the deal, and they can show the CEO that their company is going to be treated well post-acquisition.
And I guess on that theme, what do you view as the future of sourcing? Or I guess better put, how will sourcing change over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think there's going to be two angles to it. One is it's going to be more omni-channel. So if a firm did one way, sourcing teams are lean. Sourcing is about maybe one person sourcing in BD for every 4 other investment professionals. Because of that, they need leverage, and they're going to start going more omni-channel. But to do that, that means they have to do more work, which means there has to be more automation. So what we're going to see is if a sourcing professional just did cold outbound, they're going to have ways to do many other different things. They're going to have ways to get in touch with bankers, to get referrals more easily, to attend better events. And they're going to have automation that helps them select between the channels or do all of them at once so they can scale their efforts. I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet to sourcing. I don't think there's ever going to be a marketplace that says, here are the companies for sale. The minute something's on a marketplace, it turns back into an auction-like deal. It becomes competitive. So I think the market will stay fragmented and somewhat opaque. But the ways, just like how the ways Grata gets customers now, is going to evolve, and it's going to be inherently omni-channel.
And that's funny you say that, because I think I have seen a couple marketplaces pop up for more so mom and pop, like kind of brick and mortar businesses, like your landscapers of the world. Makes a ton of sense. Would love to touch on your most recent raise. I think you guys raised, 25 million Series A from Craft Ventures last February, I believe. Talk us through the process of partnering with Craft. What were you looking for in a venture capital partner, and how has Craft been involved since the round?
Yeah, that's right. We raised from Craft last year. They've been awesome. We got to know Ara, who's on our board, actually well before they invested in us. Again, talking about reaching out to companies and building relationships. We knew her about a year and a half before we raised capital. or raised our Series A, that was. And they got to know us right as we were raising our seed, kept in touch. What we really like about Craft was they have a lot of incredible content on how to build a SaaS company. Actually, David Sachs, who leads Craft, he podcasts and he writes a blog. And that we followed almost as like our playbook for building Grata. So when we started to raise our Series A, we told them we've built Grata the way it is today through the seed stage, partly following your playbook. And that was really interesting for us. And that helped us align ourselves with investors who we thought we could learn even more from. And then beyond that, post-investment, they've been incredibly helpful they have a lot of operating partners with really great expertise. For example, they've helped us with PR and comms, and they're really good at that. They've helped us with sales ops. Wherever we have a question, they have a really strong network to help route us to the right people. So it's been a great relationship so far, and we hope many more years to come.
And so I guess turning over to the product side now, I can definitely attest as a daily Grata user that Grata is extremely sticky and is one of the best platforms I've used for sourcing middle of the country deals, bootstrap, niche industries, as Will mentioned earlier, landscaping, auto, barbershop, you name it. With that, and being an earlier company, maybe compared to some of the later stage players such as SourceScrub, how do you review and process feedback from customers? How do you determine what makes sense adding to the product roadmap?
Appreciate that, Laura. It's a really good question, and it all starts with objectives. And you can I think of it in terms of two angles. One is, do you want your product to serve a new set of customers or different people who haven't bought? Or do you want it to better serve the problems of people who currently use it? And that determines how we do our product research. If it's the former, we talk to people who didn't buy from Grata. Our product team gets on a phone with them and says, this is not a sales call. We really want to understand your needs and not why you didn't buy Grata. Just tell us what your problems are, what's most important, and what would you need to make your job better. We use that to understand, and then we have to translate that to what can we actually do? What's tangential to Grata? What's not a totally different product, but what can we tackle with the technology and the foundation that we have? The other one is actually a little easier. Talking to existing customers, as you probably know, our team is very engaged with customers. We have customer success managers who handle everything from onboarding to the full life cycle, helping our customers out along the way. So whenever we want to talk to a regular customer, we have a set of what we call evangelists. They're beta testers, they're hand raisers, they're product enthusiasts who we connect with our product team to have that conversation about what they want to see improved and what would make them increase their seat usage with Grata or have Grata be a greater share of time in their day-to-day. And again, it's those conversations to understand, what do you want? What do you need? And what is actually sufficient? Like what's need to have versus nice to have if we build? Because a lot of times you have these conversations and someone can ask for the world. I want to have A, B, C, D, E. I want all these different things. Then you say, well, what do you like? If you didn't have E, could you do it? If you didn't have D, could you do it? And you kind of go through this subtractive process, figuring out what is really the minimum viable product to solve your pain point. And we have to be that way because we're a lean team. We're like 80 people. We're here in New York. We're not 8,000 people. We're not a publicly traded company. So we have to focus all of our efforts on what's most important and what's going to have the highest impact.
That makes a ton of sense. And I can definitely attest that the customer service team is very prompt and responsive. And any questions that come up, they answer, which I appreciate. And so when I was going through the process of looking for a sourcing platform to adopt, and I would say two of the biggest competitors to Grata, in my opinion, were SourceScrub and Harmonic. So can you touch on your competitive advantage over the other players in the space?
Yeah, I segment it into two different buckets. One are your databases, and then the second, there are some web scraping platforms. So let's start with databases. I would put SourceScrub in that category. There are other. Dun & Bradstreet is a database. The primary difference, and let's start off with how they collect information, and then we'll build up to what that leads to outcome-wise. The primary way they collect information is they have a whole army of research analysts who are capturing data, typically from public sources online, and putting it into a database. And that can work at subscale. You have to limit one of the dimensions, either the number of companies you cover the number of data points you cover, how frequently you collect, and how accurate it is, because how many people need to review it. So in those 4 dimensions of data, you're limited when you have limited resources because there's always a limited number of people. In fact, a joke we had, or not a joke, we went through an exercise at Grata where we gave everyone 150 companies and we said, tell us if this company is an investment bank or not. We did that with software too. We said, tell if this is a software company. We gave it to everyone at Grata and everyone had different answers. And these are like 80 people who do this every day. I would say everyone's reasonably to very smart. And we all had different opinions, even though every data point was hand checked. So that's the problem with a kind of manual driven database. What we've built with our technology is machine learning that applies at scale. So we can do this for 10 million companies and it can be consistent. So if we say company A is a software company, and we say company B is not a software company, the machine has a perfectly consistent definition of what's software. So even if you as a user disagree or say that's right or wrong, we're at least consistent in the information we provide. So that foundation, that fundamental difference in technology has allowed us to ultimately just build a better product. And that better product is more companies so you don't miss opportunities, more scale, fresher data, more accurate information. And then there's just one other element that I think a lot of people miss, and we call it search. We were inspired by Google and we're on the tech side of things. We call it search. But I think if you're a deal maker, you say, I want to find the best companies. And you use the word find or discover. That's a core component that's not in a database. A database is kind of, it looks like it's in a web portal. It looks like a kind of fancy URL. You go to, you sign in. Really what it is, it's like a giant spreadsheet. And if you just control F in a spreadsheet, oftentimes you're not going to find the right information. There's so much more depth than just filtering and searching on text in a database. And so our search algorithm really understands business information the way Google does in a lot of ways and services those right companies. So that's how we've built a product that's different and better than a database, something like a SourceScrub or a Dun & Bradstreet. When you take the data scrapers out there, Harmonic and others that are scraping LinkedIn and trying to find personal profiles, for a lot of them, there are just different use cases. There are companies that scrape Amazon and tell you all the Amazon resellers, or ones that, like I said, looked at LinkedIn and look at the individual profile of who has a stealth mode company. Those tend to lack workflow. And that's the other piece that's really key. Laura, Will, you probably both know this. It's more than just finding the company. It's more than just data. You're running a process. You have a funnel. You're reaching out to people, maybe sending them 5 or 6 emails. You're collecting data. You have a conversation with the CEO. You have to take notes. You have to call it a high priority company. That's a component that's oftentimes missed by just pure data acquisition engines or scrapers. And we actually didn't have this initially in Grata. V1 of Grata in 2020 didn't have this. But as we iterated the product over the last couple of years, we've built deep integrations with CRMs that work bidirectionally. We've built the ability to take notes and collaborate, label companies, manage a funnel, which are that critical components to managing the process, which is really important for getting a deal done.
If you were to pick one area that's Grata's superpower, what would it be? Where do you guys really call yourself kind of differentiator?
It's search. You're looking for one thing, whatever that is, Grata will find it for you and you won't miss it. And search, that's the active search. That's when you type into the search box. Search is actually, called a microservice, quote unquote, in the platform that powers a lot of different things. It powers benchmarking, comps, sizing. It works a lot behind the scenes to help us calibrate the data and information that's being shown.
Awesome. I know, Nevin, we chat off on the side quite frequently and know that bidirectionally you're, as COO, have been focused on the customer journey, right? Focusing on marketing, sales, customer success. Curious how having the perspective across the whole customer lifecycle has influenced your strategy across divisions. Have you any examples where learnings from one division in marketing, could influence your strategy in another division?
Yeah, this is my day. This is my everyday. As you said, it's working across marketing, which is top of the funnel, to sales, which is mid funnel, to customer success, which is post-customer acquisition, to operations, HR, finance. And then I also coordinate and interface with product and engineering. Yeah, so this is what I do every day, is a flywheel. And it all circles together and it all has to work in a really smooth way for it to run fast enough and grow big enough. And the smoother it works together, the more efficiently you grow. So I spend a lot of time, I'll give you at least 1-2 examples I can give you. Like in the early days, something that we realized when we were building search, this is when we were focusing on search and our core capability, is we thought of search very Google-like, of put in a word, put in a keyword, get a set of companies back. But what we found, and this is what sales found, is a lot of people said, I want to search for lookalike companies, meaning I get a deal to me, or I go have a conversation and that company can't transact. They've already raised money or they're just not interested. But I studied that business model. I studied the market. I know I like this company. I want to go find everyone else like them because I've done the work. And now all I need to do is find a company that's willing, that's good, that's willing to transact. That's an example of a feature that we built, which is our similar company search feature that came from an insight from a set of sales conversations that then flowed in to customer success and then flowed back into marketing to help market that feature when we released it. It's something that's so simple to me now. It's so obvious. It's one of our core features and differentiators, but it wasn't obvious on the initial days, but it came from that sales insight.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant part of the product and something that I think competitors have tried to replicate as well.
So given this has been a journey for you to get to where Grata is today, if you could go back in time, is there anything you would change?
Yeah, the biggest one is probably not raising capital sooner. We bootstrapped out of the early days. Bootstrapping was fun. We were on our own timeline, and there were other things about it that were not so much fun. It was having limited resources, thinking about making payroll month to month, just not having the expertise and the backing of people who have seen the story play out over decades to help us avoid the pitfalls and the traps that companies run into. I think we would have found product market fit sooner had we raised capital sooner. So going back, I would have engaged an investor network and been maybe at that point, because it was many years ago, investors weren't as proactive about reaching out, and that could be part of it too.
Well, they didn't have the tools.
Yeah, they didn't. That's right. It's kind of circular here. But yeah, I would have raised capital like a year and a half out of the gate.
Interesting. Yeah, it's good to know. And given that you did start Grata at a young age and you're still young, how would you define the type of leader you are today, and how has it evolved since the early days?
And sometimes I feel old because I'm one of the oldest people at the company, but we tend to have a pretty young, energetic company. It's a really good question. I mean, it would describe my leadership. I was an associate. Been an analyst. I came out of a very detail-oriented role. And when I started Grata, and even today, I tend to be really detail-oriented in the weeds. But when we scaled, you realize you just can't do that when you have a full customer success team, a 20-person sales team, a product team, a marketing team. Like, you need good leaders. I think what I learned over the last few years, my style has become more along hire good leaders. So people are really important, and give them really clear objectives, or work with them to align on objectives. And then so they know where they're going and let them figure out how to get there. So I do still spend a ton of time in the details. People would say I'm very in the weeds, but it's very targeted. It's what's the small problem that needs to get fixed that's going to unblock you. And I like to lead by example. So if I say, hey, I'm going to be in the office 3 days a week, I'm going to be there all 3 days a week. Or if I say everyone needs to be analytical and know Excel, I'm going to know Excel really well and be analytical. So I try to be in the weeds and help people where they need it, but ultimately give them the objective and let them work towards it, only pulling me in when they need to be unblocked or when they think it can facilitate them to get to those goals faster.
Definitely a strong bias to action.
I guess on that, what would you say is the most important skill that you've learned over the past couple of years?
So how to manage managers is probably one of the most important, because even coming out of private equity and consulting, I had spent a little time managing analysts. You learn a little bit how to project manage, but managing managers is a challenge, because if you manage managers like you manage individual contributors, you don't get the best outcomes. And I found that was a skill I had to learn. It was really hard to learn it. But again, once you learn that, managing managers of managers or managers of managers of managers is the same skill. So you really need to learn it once, and that scales really well. So I think I learned an objective-based, outcome-based approach of this is what we need to achieve. You tell me your path to get there and I'll help you along that path, versus the, hey, we have a project, you need to get this little chunk of work done and I'm going to manage the work getting done. So I never think about like this individual really good at this specific task, but can this manager or individual reach the objective?
Yeah, that's a very powerful response and something I hope I'll need to learn in the next couple of years.
So we like to end every episode with 2 questions. The first question is, what motivates you to work hard?
A lot of it's in my DNA. Like I've just been working hard since I'm a kid. But if I really, really peel back and say what makes me work hard at Grata, it's the outcome of what we're doing. And when you look at it from just one step away, yeah, we're helping deal makers source better deals, be more effective. But I like to look at it 2 steps ahead and say, what is happening in the economy because of what we're doing? And what's happening is there are more small businesses, medium-sized businesses getting liquidity and getting capital. If you work for a big company and you got a pension, you have a big 401k, if you ran your own business, and Laura, you were talking about those middle America businesses, the landscapers, the others, you know, they didn't have this opportunity. And by facilitating them being found, it gives them the opportunity to continue their business, get out capital. So great businesses persist in America. Great entrepreneurs are able to get capital and retire well and live a good life. And like, that's what really excites me. That's what kind of keeps me up at night, to say like, this is the impact that we can have. And it's, you know, it's a little bit ambitious and visionary, but that's what really gets me excited.
No, for sure. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. And just what's one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
Listen to older people more. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with experience, and my younger self would say, oh, that's the old way of doing things, and I'm going to do things in a different way. But going back, and I try to listen to people who have more experience than me. There's no other way to catch wisdom than, I think, human patterns. I think history repeats itself. Human nature is pretty similar. That's why you have the wise oracles out there who can predict the next financial crisis. They're like, yeah, I've seen this before. I saw the .com bubble. I saw the real estate crisis. And I think learning from those experiences, I never liked history as a child. Like when I took courses, I was like, I love math, I love science. I don't like history and English. I mean, going back, those are some of the most important subjects because they help you build these skills that you didn't learn otherwise. And part of that history is learning from people with more experience than you.
I think that's a great note to end on. So, you know, Nevin, we've had a blast. I think we've had a really fun conversation here today. Thanks so much for joining Laura and I on the podcast, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, well, Laura, thanks for having me. Great questions today.
Thanks.
Great.